Hey everyone, welcome to our first lecture series of the semester. Our focus this week is really going to be on this foundational topic of the sales profession. So in our unit this week, we're going to kind of explore the different structures of sales departments across sport organizations, what that looks like, what the different career paths look like. And then we're also going to talk about some of the stigma surrounding a career in ticket sales and other areas of sales in the sport industry and some of the misconceptions about that. So that's really our focus for this week. And again, the idea is really just to do a total overview of the sales profession in general as it relates to the sport industry. Before we get into that, though, I do just want to address the elephant in the room, and that is COVID-19. Obviously, COVID-19 is having major implications on the sport industry as a whole right now, and you all know that maybe more, maybe better than anyone else because you're on the front lines. So I do just want to acknowledge that this is something I'm keeping in mind throughout the semester, and I want to incorporate examples and kind of recent stories about how sport organizations are adapting in terms of ticket sales and that sort of thing. So I do want to have that be a part of or a component of our course this semester. But I do also want us to focus on some important content that I consider to be foundational. So while we'll certainly address COVID implications where it's appropriate, I think our main focus this semester is going to be talking about ticket sales, learning about the selling process, and how it applies to the sport industry. Okay, so the first question I always ask students at the beginning of a sales class is, what are we selling in the sport industry? Take a minute to yourself and kind of think about some of the things that we're actually selling. And you can pause this if you want to take a few minutes to jot down some examples. Okay, so, if we were in class, I would have you guys share some of your examples, but instead I will just kind of share a list here that I've put together of some of the things that we're selling on a day-to-day basis in the sport industry. So obviously we're selling tickets, we're selling sponsorship packages, we're selling media rights. We're selling the idea of giving or donating to our organizations. We're selling, the list goes on and on, right? I'm not going to read through all of these, but you get the idea. Um, we're selling a lot of different types of inventory in the sport industry, and all of them are important in their own ways. But our focus this semester will primarily be centered on selling tickets. And I think our discussion today through this video lecture will hopefully bring light to why that is and why we're putting such a focus on this particular piece of inventory. We'll also talk briefly about selling sponsorship packages toward the end of the semester. But I do want you to keep in mind that many of the concepts that we discuss regarding selling tickets can be applied to other areas as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in this lecture, but I just want you to keep that in mind that while our scope might seem a bit limited in that we're focusing primarily on tickets and sponsorships, I do think you'll find ultimately that a lot of these concepts can be more broadly applied. Okay, so why focus the semester on tickets and ticketing sales? Well, ticket sales tend to be the lifeblood of most sport organizations. They remain a top revenue line item for both college athletics and professional sports teams. And we're watching in real time as the loss of ticket revenue has major impact on the financial well-being of these organizations. So, of course, this is an important component to the business operations of any sport organization that is putting on live performance. So that's primarily why we're going to focus on it this semester. A secondary reason for us to focus primarily on ticket sales is that this is where a lot of the jobs are in our field. Um, and a study recently found that 31% of all jobs posted on Teamwork Online were sales related in some way. That's a big chunk, right? So that's double the percentage of jobs related to other aspects of the industry like marketing, communications, community relations. This is prior to our current economic situation. So keep that in mind. But I think if you looked historically at the job market in the sport industry, sales tends to be an area of consistency, right? Sport organizations are always looking to hire people to generate revenue for their organization. So not only is ticket sales the lifeblood of operations for a lot of these organizations, it's also a fertile ground for the job market. And again, I'm not teaching this class to convince you to change all your career plans to go into sales, but I do just want you to keep in mind sort of the impact that has on the job market and the fact that a lot of jobs out there do want and are seeking someone with some kind of sales related experience. Kind of connected to that, while the jobs out there do tend to favor sales as an area of importance, the same is true for internships. And some of you might have seen this firsthand as you were getting internship experiences as an undergrad. But Becky and I actually recently did a study where we examined internship postings in the sport industry. And we found that next to internships related to digital media and content, sales was the next most commonly sought after position. So 20% of the postings we examined were related to ticket sales. So this isn't just a commonality across full-time jobs, but also internships as well. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about some of the typical sport sales positions. And some of you might be a little more aware of this than others, but I thought it would be helpful just to provide an overview of what basically what a ticket sales office would look like if you went in to a professional sports team's office. So generally we start with inside sales or an account representative. This is sort of your bottom of the rung in terms of the totem pole, right? So these are entry level folks, maybe just out of college. Their focus is outreach, trying to make as many calls as possible and trying to generate leads for the organization. Basically, inside sales tends to be like a trial ground. Folks are hired in at inside sales. If they're successful after maybe 3 or 4 months, then they get hired on full time to be account representatives. So it's kind of a proving ground in that way. And if someone's not successful in inside sales, they may not be hired on full time. But it's a way for the sport organization to kind of assess whether or not someone has the ability to sell their product. Account representatives tend to be full time. They tend to have some kind of commission based structure, and they tend to have some kind of benefits associated with their job as well. So what are inside sales and account reps selling? Well, they're selling tickets, of course, but they're typically either focused on B2C sales or B2B sales. You can see here that means business to consumer sales. So the sport organization is trying to sell tickets to individuals, or business to business sales where the sport organization is trying to sell inventory to other businesses. So those are kind of the two areas of sales that that particular group of sales reps would focus on. I'd say probably most sport organizations will have those reps focused on B2C sales, and they might have some reps focused on B2B, but primarily they're going to focus on business to consumer sales. Okay, group sales is the next type of position. As you can imagine, these folks are tasked with selling group tickets. So generally anything more than 15 would constitute a group. They're focused on, identifying what types of groups might be interested in coming to a game, right? And that's all going to depend on the community they're in. So there's a little bit more relationship building when it comes to group sales. They might be working with a local boys and girls club to get them to come to a game. Maybe they include singing the national anthem as part of that package. So it's a little bit more involved than just the account representative or inside sales positions. Group sales is generally seen as a step up from that as well. Okay, premium seating is kind of the next step up here. These folks are focused on selling your premium seating, right? So club seats, suites, really anything that has a premium connotation to it in terms of price point and the services being offered. You'll often see these folks focused on business to business sales, right? They're focused on selling suite to a corporation that might use it to entertain clients or give out incentives to employees, whatever that might be. So premium seating reps tend to be reps that are a little more seasoned, have a lot of experience with the organization, and they have, the ability to sell that premium content. Excuse me. All right, customer service and retention. This is the area of sales that I worked in when I worked for the St. Louis Blues. And this particular area of sales is really focused on being the supportive arm to some of these other departments in sales. So customer service is focused on, okay, once we have sold the package to the family or the business, what do we need to do to make sure that they keep coming back, right? How do we retain these people so that it's not just a one-time purchase? So that's really the focus of customer service and retention, whether that's putting on season ticket holder events, having retention days where you look to retain clients who might be acting as if they're going to not renew their tickets. A lot of outreach and customer service occurs here. And again, it's really meant to be like a supportive arm to the outbound sales folks and really meant to help them fulfill sales and maintain those sales. Okay, ticket operations is obviously another area of sales here. This particular area tends to be separate from the actual sales folks. So ticket operations is usually housed in the box office, right? Versus being housed where the outbound ticket sales folks are. So ticket operations, they're dealing more with logistics. How are we getting the tickets that have been purchased to the fans? They're also selling single game tickets and they're facilitating those exchanges. So they're definitely focused more on the logistics and the operations versus the actual selling. A growing area of sales right now in sports is CRM and analytics. So customer relationship management and analytics. This is a huge component of selling in 2020, right? We're not just pulling out a phone book and picking a number and calling it. These sport organizations are using big data to determine leads, to really get to know customers in a way that they never have been able to before. And they need folks who are experts on using these softwares so that they can actually use that data. It's not just sitting there in a computer. So actually there's a couple of sport management programs that are now fully focused on data analytics. You can get a degree in sport analytics. I think Syracuse is probably the first program to do that, but we're starting to see more and more of that because there's a real need across the country for these types of positions. All right, last one here is corporate sales. This tends to be more on the sponsorship side of things. So you have sponsorship folks that are focused on selling sponsorships, or partnerships is another way that it's referred to. Again, we're going to hold off for now and talking too much about the sponsorship side of things. We'll do that on the back half or during the back half of the semester, but keep in mind that that is another type of sales position. All right, let's talk a little bit about sales models. Right, basically what we're talking about here is kind of the model that a sport organization uses to sell tickets. And there are basically three different core models here. Outbound sales is sales personnel are making outbound calls to prospects, right? They get leads, they make calls and try to sell tickets. This is pretty common across professional sports, right? Most professional sports teams have an outbound sales department with folks that are making outbound calls to prospects. Inbound sales is a much more antiquated sales model, so kind of the opposite of outbound sales. No one's making calls out. They have folks in the office who are there to take calls if someone calls in and is interested in buying a ticket. Again, that's a much more antiquated sales model, of course, because you're not being proactive at all, basically just waiting for the phone to ring. And you might be surprised to learn that not that long ago, most college athletic departments were doing this. We're applying this inbound sales model. And I'll show you here on the next slide. A colleague and friend of mine, Nels Pop, has studied this particular topic a lot in recent years. And basically, he wanted to know, of all the FBS Division I university athletic departments, kind of who was actually employing outbound sales departments, and how has that changed throughout the years. So you can see here from his table, if you look back to 2004, 2005, which is the first year of data he had, of the 116 schools at the time, only one had an in-house outbound sales department. That means that 115, so the majority of athletic departments, did not employ any sales employees, right? They were simply waiting for the phone to ring. So if you sort of flash forward here to 2016-17, which was the last year of his data collection, you can see a huge change has occurred, right? So now you see that more than 75% of the athletic departments are using some kind of outbound sales. So either they have their own in-house staff or they're outsourcing ticket sales, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But only 31 of those athletic departments now have no sales team. So this is obviously a massive shift in a very short period of time, just from 2005 to 2017, and those numbers are probably higher now if we had some more recent data. So a massive shift here, and I think this is a really interesting topic for college athletic departments to consider, right? And it's the fact that, of course, if we're spending money and we're putting resources toward selling tickets, we're probably going to generate more revenue. So I think there's been a lot more study on this topic, and college athletic departments have realized, hey, we can have more control over this process and we can generate more revenue. Excuse me. Okay, I mentioned outsourcing on that last slide, and outsourcing is when teams will hire a third-party organization to handle a portion of their business, such as selling tickets. So we see this with organizations like Learfield and IMG. Here at Illinois State, the Redbirds actually have an outsourcing company that does some outbound sales for them, and we're actually going to have the president of that operation with Learfield come talk to us later this semester. So we're going to hear a little bit more about what sales is like from that perspective. But as we saw from the table, college athletic departments are starting to kind of a split in terms of half of them are using their own outbound sales departments and probably another half are using outsourcing. So either way, we've definitely seen a shift of more college athletic departments doing some kind of outbound sales. All right, another question I like to ask students in this class is, does winning always equate to sales? And certainly while winning does generally have a positive relationship with attendance in sport, and that's what the data would tell us, there still tend to always be high performing teams that don't sell and poor performing teams that sell well. So what does this tell us about the sports industry? Well, it tells us that winning isn't everything, right? You can see a couple headlines here from a few years ago when the Yankees moved into their new stadium. They had created, a lot of premium seating areas, and they really struggled to sell tickets in those first few years. And meanwhile, they're in first place, right? So they really struggled to sell that inventory. In that case, winning didn't seem to have an impact on ticket sales. Another great case example here is the 76ers. So we've seen a real shift for the 76ers in recent years, going from a team that could barely sell tickets while still having a losing record, starting to sell a ton of tickets. So here's a little bit of data for you. You can see at the top, you can see the 76ers record starting in 2014-15. That record gets a little better each year, but still pretty poor in 16 and 17. But if you look at their season ticket sales in that same time period, see a massive increase, right? Going from 3,400 to 14,000, basically within a matter of 3 years. So again, what does this tell us about sales departments in the sport industry? Well, it tells us that they can have a major impact, right? And what we saw with the 76ers is that winning didn't matter. What mattered was the team made the decision that they were going to quadruple the number of people working in their sales staff and hire some really smart people that know what they're talking about in terms of ticket sales. And doing just that, investing in their ticket sales department allowed them to increase season ticket sales while the team was still struggling to win games. So I use this example again to show that while those of us practitioners working in sports may not have control over what's happening on the field or on the court, the decisions we make can still impact the revenue that's generated. And I think the 76ers are a great example of that. Okay, I'm going to pause here and do a second video so you can take a little break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about overcoming stigma and some of the misconceptions about working in ticket sales.